Elmore Manufacturing Company was founded in 1893 in Elmore, Ohio, which was a small town in between Cleveland and Toledo, Ohio, founded by Harmon V. Becker and his two sons, James and Burton. Elmore Manufacturing Company originally manufactured bicycles, and they built bicycles from 1893 to about 1900. Elmore Manufacturing Company would move headquarters 25 miles south to Clyde, Ohio. Elmore would pivot to automotive production around 1900. The original Elmore power plant was a single-cylinder two-stroke engine or Clark Day patent engine, which the Beck brothers acquired the rights to produce. The engine only had 3 moving parts per cylinder inside the engine: the crankshaft, connecting rod, and piston. This engine did not have valves. Air, fuel, and oil mixture entered the crankcase, where it was compressed and sent to a bypass chamber and then sent to the cylinder itself. The piston would uncover and cover different ports inside the engine. The piston itself acted like valves because this engine was essentially valveless. Being a two-stroke or two-cycle meant that a complete full power cycle within only 2 piston movements was achieved, one up and one down. Intake and compression happened on the upward stroke. Combustion and exhaust happened on the downward stroke. Elmore's engine design, especially in the early days, was basic. They did not have valves, they did not have gears, cams, sprockets, chains, none of that inside the engine. Elmore was advertised as the valveless engine. In the early days, poppet valve technology wasn't totally understood, and early engines were prone to carbon buildup. Elmore would advertise the importance of the two-stroke design, being valveless with fewer parts, making more power with less. It's important to note that Elmore wasn't the only manufacturer to offer two-stroke engines in the early days. Other companies included, but not limited to, Roberts Motor Company, Page Detroit, Winton Motor Company, which made the first, if not one of the first, two-stroke diesel engines, which was also sold to General Motors. Perhaps a little bit of foreshadowing. For two-cycle engines, the most popular method of lubrication is to feed the oil into the inlet pipe next to the carburetor. The oil is fed strictly proportionate to the fuel burned. Different engines would achieve the oiling process differently. Elmore had their own system feeding the oil into the cylinder with the gasoline. It consisted of force feed into the inlet manifold, where the mixture of gasoline, air, would move the oil to the proper places with fewer moving parts, so not much oil was needed. Very important to note, Elmore made cars from 1900 to 1902. Only about 10 cars were produced during that time period, and then they would incorporate in 1902. They offered a single cylinder and a vertical twin. The single cylinder had a cubic inch displacement of 56.5 inches. It was valveless, single cylinder, 0.9 liters. It was good for anywhere between 5 to 10 horsepower at 800 RPM, estimated 70 pound-feet or 94 newton meters around 500 RPM, with a bore of 4.5 inches and a stroke of 4 inches. Years this engine was used, 1900 through 1905. Sources conflict. Some sources say that it was used until 1904, and it was mounted horizontally under the seat. During this era, Elmore would also offer a vertical twin that was 113 cubic inch displacement, 1.8 liters. It was good for anywhere between 16 to 24 horsepower at 800 RPM, with an estimated 160 pound-feet or 216 newton meters around 500 RPM. The same bore of 4 inches and the same stroke of 4.5 inches. Years this engine was used was 1902 through 1905. In 1906, Elmore would introduce 2 new engine designs, an inline 3 and an inline 4 cylinders, which were mounted vertical, and they were essentially single cylinders that shared a common crankcase, single crankshaft. The later engines also got a more complicated 2-step piston design. The pistons look sort of like bells, essentially having 2 compression chambers. A step piston is a piston that is bigger at the bottom and more slender at the top. There are 3 rings at the top and 2 rings at the bottom. Fuel would also be distributed from the crankcase, and it would go into a fuel rail or fuel rotor, which was a hollow shaft that has openings. When the engine is running, the rail spins and sends the fuel to each cylinder. While researching this episode, I was able to find a channel called A Road Less Traveled where they take one of these engines apart. So if you want to see what this engine looks like and what I'm talking about with the fuel rail, I'm going to link it in the description below. So be sure to check that out after the show. It's also important to note that the newer engine design had an oil reservoir compartment inside the crankcase. 169.6 cubic inch displacement, inline vertical 3, 2.77 liters. It was good for anywhere between 24 to 34 horsepower at around 800 RPM with an estimated 225 pound-feet or 305 Newton meters around 500 RPM with a bore of 4.5 inches and a stroke of 4 inches. The years this engine was used, 1906 through 1909, and it was phased out for the inline 4, which had a cubic inch displacement of, and this information is a bit conflicting. If you plug in the bore and stroke numbers into the calculator for engine displacement calculator, it's 226.2, but every source says that this engine is 254.4 cubic inch displacement inline vertical 4, which would make it 4.16 liters. It was good for anywhere between 35 to all the way up to 70 horsepower in a touring model in 1911 at 800 RPM. If it made 70 horsepower at 800 RPM, in theory, that would be 460 pound-feet or 623 Newton meters at 500 RPM with a bore of 4.5 inches and a stroke of 4 inches. The years this engine was used, 1906 until 1912. By 1910, the 4-cylinder was the only power plant offered by Elmore. As fate would have it, the 3-cylinder, 2-stroke gasoline-powered engine would catch the attention of none other than General Motors founder William C. Durant. Durant would purchase Elmore in 1909 for $500,000. Elmore was offered at General Motors for a time, but William Durant was forced out of the company that he founded in 1910. Elmore would last through the 1912 model year, but then it was cut along with some other underperforming brands to try to make General Motors more profitable. Now it's time for Would You Rather. One scenario today, all Elmore, but which one would you rather have? Would you rather have a 1902 Elmore or 1906 Elmore Model 15 or 1910 Elmore Model 36? I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. Now it's time for Name That Tune. First person to give the name of the band, artist, or composer and the name of the song will have their comment pinned to the top of the comment section. Thank you all so much for coming out and watching this. This engine episode was recommended to do a deep dive on from last week's engine episode. If you guys can think of any engines that you would love to see featured on this channel, because I absolutely loved finding out all the information about this one. I had no idea that they put 2-stroke engines in cars back in the day. Really cool concept. It sucks it never really caught on. Also, if anybody has any information at all on the Winton 2-stroke diesel engine, which eventually turned into the General Motors 2-stroke diesel engine, please email me at what_it's_like@yahoo.com. It's an engine episode that I've been working on for a little while. I just can't find enough information on it. Any information you provide would be beneficial. Thank you all so much again. Until next time, hey, Fat Albert here. Toodaloo!